And so Chris Rodda and the course of writing about this stuff says that, well, the motto that you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free, Jefferson didn't do that because it wasn't added until the 1890s. No. It was added in the 1830s. That building burned down, and they redid it in the 1890s. So she's into this thing and saying Jefferson didn't have any religious beliefs or religious views. He's against everything. And so she quotes a source that indeed does show that it was on the building in the 1890s. But it doesn't show the original source that burned down that's there. And that's all documented as well in the university archive.
The chapter of my book on the subject of Jefferson and education is the longest chapter. It's something like 95 pages. Jefferson was involved in several education plans in schools over the course of 50 years, and the revisionists have concocted lies about all of them. The longest section of the chapter is about the University of Virginia, but it also debunks other lies like the one about Jefferson trying to import a theological seminary to America from Europe, and the one about him requiring Bible reading in public schools. But Barton doesn't go after any of the big, widely used lies I debunked in this chapter. He picks this much less significant one about a building at the University of Virginia, one that isn't even from one of his books. Apparently, this was the only thing in my 95 pages on Jefferson and education that he thought he could successfully rebut. But that was only because he was clearly confused about what building I was talking about. And in his attempt to rebut what I wrote, he succeeds only in demonstrating just how shoddy his research skills really are. What Barton is referring to is a part of my chapter where I'm talking about a book from 1901 called The True Thomas Jefferson by William Elroy Curtis. Now, my reasons for even bothering with anything from such an old revisionist book is that this book was recently reprinted by a Christian publishing company and is currently being used by homeschoolers, and it contains many of the same lies found in the more recent revisionist books, including all the stuff rattled off by Barton about Jefferson and the University of Virginia. Now, here's the lie from The True Thomas Jefferson, the one that Barton mistakenly thinks he's got me on.
There is a popular impression that Jefferson forbade religious instruction at the University of Virginia, but the contrary is the case. That institution is usually coupled with Girard College as an example of atheistic propaganda. But the motto of the university is a passage from St. Paul, selected by Jefferson, and by his orders inscribed upon the frieze of the rotunda of the auditorium. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
The building that Curtis was talking about here is Cabell Hall, a building that really wasn't built until over 70 years after Jefferson's death. And Barton is obviously confused about what building burnt down and was rebuilt. It was the rotunda that burnt down in 1895, and Cabell Hall was one of several new buildings that the university decided to add at the same time the rotunda was being rebuilt. Cabell Hall did not exist in the 1830s, as Barton claims. But the really funny thing about Barton's claim is that even if this inscription had been chosen in the 1830s, it still wouldn't have had anything to do with Jefferson, because Jefferson died in 1826. It was actually a man named Armistead Gordon, a member of the Board of Visitors in the 1890s, who proposed the inscription. After that, it was adopted by some as an unofficial motto, but the university never actually had an official motto. Its seal, proposed by Jefferson and adopted by the original Board of Visitors, depicted the goddess Minerva, and the only wording on it was the name of the university and the date of its founding. Now, all of this is in those university records that Barton claims to have gotten his information from, but he goes on in this next clip from his radio show to say that I was just writing what I was taught and don't know about any sources other than what I've experienced, whatever that means. Now, I wasn't taught anything about this building. I researched its history using the same sources that Barton himself claims to have used. I just didn't get confused about which building I was researching.
So since it contradicts what she was taught, then I've got to be making it up. It can't be that there's any sources other than what she's experienced and what she's learned. And that's why in books like Original Intent, we have nearly 1,700 footnotes in that book. We footnote the dickens out of stuff, and so if people are really interested, that's the best way to do it, is just get some of those books like Original Intent, where we just spend a lot of time almost excessively documenting footnotes. But we do that because so many senators and so many reps and so many judges use this stuff, and we just can't afford to have them get shot at for making a bad quote or saying the wrong thing. So that's why we document it all.
Yeah, let me tell you, bro, you footnote too much for me. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
But
it's because of these kind of criticisms. This is exactly the reason. I want people to know that if they use it, they can use it with confidence, and here's the reason why, because it's documented right here to this writing on this date in this archive, and you can see the actual letter yourself.
Well, all that footnoting the dickens out of stuff so that judges and members of Congress can use it with confidence didn't work out all too well for one of Barton's buddies in Congress, Representative Randy Forbes of Virginia. Just last year, Forbes used a bunch of Barton's lies and footnotes in his proposed House Resolution 888, a resolution calling for an annual Religious Heritage Week. Forbes' resolution never made it to the floor, thanks in large part to his reliance on Barton's work. I exposed this resolution early last January on one of the blogs I write on, debunking about a dozen or so of the countless historical lies in its 75 whereas clauses. Within days, 3 big organizations and a bunch of smaller websites and blogs had started a massive campaign against the resolution. I continued to debunk its lies, writing a new piece each time the resolution got more co-sponsors. At the same time, Barton's Wall Builders organization was sending out mass emails telling people to write their representatives in support of the resolution. Barton even had Randy Forbes as a guest on his radio show, but their efforts were in vain. By the middle of March, someone from one of the organizations on our side, who had delivered some of what I had written, along with some information about Barton to some House Oversight Committee staffers he knew, had informed me that the resolution was effectively dead. So much for a congressman being able to use Barton's work with confidence. Well, Barton's radio show continued with a laughable exchange between Barton and his co-host Rick Green about how Barton, by his excessive footnoting and use of original documents, has raised the bar much too high for the academic community to be able to handle.
Well, I say that tongue-in-cheek. I'll tell you why I do, because, you let me put your Slavery and the Founding Fathers article as an appendix in my book, and I had to actually say at the end, there are too many footnotes for me to fit them in my book, so please go to David's website so you can see the footnotes, because there really were. There was so many. I mean, I really have always been amazed. I mean, when I first started reading some of your stuff back in the 90s, that coming out of law school and everything, I was still so impressed with the fact that everything was so well documented. And, of course, at the time, I didn't know you personally, and I didn't know the attacks that you'd been under, and that's why you were so meticulous. And I think most people, when they see some of that stuff on the web, or even when they hear you speak, they don't realize that you've got this huge library with this, roughly 100,000 documents, and that you've got the originals, and that you guys, I mean, the way you pour over this stuff, and you're able to actually pull it from the original document. I think some people, they do hear stuff on the web where people do go just make stuff up. And so when you come along somebody that's actually raised the standard, I mean, your documentation and even the level of evidence that you've got to have before you'll use a quote of a founding father is above and beyond what is acceptable in typical
academic community. They're willing to quote each other, and I'm not willing to quote other professors just because Professor so-and-so said so.
Yeah,
I want to see it actually in their writings. And that is a standard the academic community still refuses to use to this day. And that's a bar that right now is much too high for them. And that's why they say, well, you're making this stuff up, is because they quote each other, but I actually quote the actual written original document.
Barton's big example of the standards of that academic community he's raised the bar too high for is the book The Godless Constitution, which he takes out and waves around and makes fun of during his presentations. Barton also shows 2 obscure articles from years ago in which the authors claimed that all the founders were deists and atheists. Now, no one who has seriously studied American history would make that claim. I certainly wouldn't. The founders were a very diverse group religiously. There were some who were extremely devout Christians, some who weren't religious at all, and many who fell somewhere in between. And just like today, there were plenty of hypocrites who belonged to churches and Bible societies and used lots of religious rhetoric, but certainly didn't act like Christians. But Barton needs to set up this straw man that all of us secularists say that all of the founders were deists and atheists, so he has something to knock down. The following clip is of Barton talking about the Godless Constitution in his presentation. I only have an audio recording of this part of the presentation from the night I was at it, but Barton gave this same well-rehearsed presentation virtually word for word a few weeks earlier at another church, and someone put their video of that presentation online. So rather than using my audio here, I'm going to use that video.